Good day, everyone. So, my name is JD, and again, you're still at Field Study 1. We are now at the lesson 13. Okay, so for lesson 13, this is somehow related to our previous discussion on assessment for and assessment as learning, which falls on formative assessments. This will also just be a quick discussion on summative assessments. So, assessment of learning falls on the category or falls on summative assessments. Um, Take note that as teachers, we have to check the learner's learning progressively. That's for the formative assessment. But on the summative assessment, this one is at the end of the instructions, okay, the totality of the instructions. And we're providing a summative assessment. Take note that it is actually encouraged that in writing an exam writing an summative assessment, as teachers we must first develop these exams before we start the instructions, because these are actually the end point. That's what we want our students to learn. We are not encouraged to make difficult activities or difficult examinations to just to prove that your subject is difficult. We want to make summative assessments that we really intend that the learners would learn at the end of the instruction. Again, we teach to educate, not to intimidate students. Okay, so assessment of learning again would fall on the summative assessments, and this is done after the instruction. That's why it's called the summative assessments, the totality of the learning. Okay, so it is used to certify what students know and can do at the level of their proficiency and competencies. Remember that there are competencies, proficiencies expected per year level. So it has to be attained, okay? So using the summative assessments, this could actually certify, this could actually prove if these students were able to attain these competencies. And then the results would also reveal if instructional tools is effective. Okay, if your intended outcomes is successfully achieved at the end of the assessment, that would mean, of course, your effectivity as a teacher. But we also, just like what I've mentioned a while ago, we don't make difficult activities to intimidate students, but we also don't make very, very easy summative assessments just to prove that our teaching is effective. Okay, we of course have to consider the test constructions or activity constructions that should be higher order thinking skills. That's what we want in the 21st century education. We don't just want our students to be someone who could memorize, but also who could understand, analyze, apply, and use this to create a new knowledge. Okay, so that's what we want. Again, we don't make very difficult assessment to intimidate. We also don't make very easy assessment just to prove our effectivity as teachers. Okay. The information from the assessment of learning is usually expressed as marks or letters of grades. Take note that again, summative assessments is the totality of the learning of the learner or the learning of the students. So that's the end goal. Okay, so dyan papasok ang assessment and evaluation. You're going to give numerical marks. Now, evaluation would tell us the meaning of these numerical marks or uh, alphabetical marks, okay, letter marks. Now, the result, which are communicated with the students, parents, and other stakeholders for decision making. Remember that in curriculum development, there are different stakeholders of education. We're not just talking about teachers, administrators, or students, but of course, the parents and the community. Now, these marks could actually give us an overview on the decision that we're going to do to the learner or to the education system. Now, it is also a powerful factor that could pave the way for educational reform. Say, for example, that the summative assessment showed that the performance of this year grade level or the performance of this school is poor. So, of course, there should be a reform on objectives and instructions, okay? That should be aligned on the competencies and outcomes expected. So, this is a reform on instructional. Somehow we call this a call for curriculum change or curriculum innovation based on the results of the summative assessments. Also, this could also be used on international scaling. Of course, we have to determine the performance of the school and the national level and the international level as well. So this could also be a call again for a curriculum change or a curriculum innovation institutionally or even nationally, even internationally. Now, in the assessment of learning, the teachers must be able to develop these following. Number one is we will be able to determine the alignment of assessment tools, task with intended learning outcomes. Remember that in the curriculum development, what you intend for the learners to perform in the outcomes or even the objectives should be aligned. The objectives, the instructions, and the outcomes should be aligned. If you're asking for definition, the assessment should be in definition. If the you're asking for analyzation, you should be giving an analysis activity. That's what we want. Or say creation of knowledge. Of course, that should be the summative assessment as well. So make sure that the assessment is aligned vertically and horizontally. Okay. Next is critique the traditional and authentic assessment tools and task for learning in the context of the established guidelines on test constructions. Traditional assessments are still effective. Authentic assessments are also still effective, but this is dependent on the subject where you are using it. This is also dependent on how you use this assessment. Say, for example, pen and paper assessments. Okay, when are you supposed to use this? Portfolio assessments. When are you going to use this? So, as teachers, you're the one who's going to determine when should this assessment tool be used. Okay. So you're not just assessing the tool itself, you're also assessing the result of this. Okay. Evaluate non-traditional assessment tools, including scoring rubrics. Rubrics, uh, you know, making a non-traditional assessment is actually quite difficult because the rubrics construction is somehow difficult also. It has to be validated and evaluated. Now, in scoring, in scoring, you must determine the certain levels. Say, example, if you're going to give 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 points, what are the parameters to consider? If you're, say, for example, making a mock-up, making an essay, making an oral presentation, okay? It has to be, or a portfolio, assessing a portfolio. No, it has to be evaluated. Okay, as teachers, we don't just make our own evaluation. We should also consult other teachers. Okay. Next is examine different types of rubrics and relate them to the assessment of students' learning. And of course, construct assessment questions. If you're constructing assessment questions, make sure, of course, to understand the table of specification. It's not encouraged that all the questions or all the activities in your summative assessment is all HOTS. Some require, of course, it has to contain lots. Okay, there are information that are important also no in a lower order thinking skill. So you cannot actually demand too much from the learners, especially if your assessment is quite difficult. Again, we are not making a very difficult assessment. We are not going to make a very easy summative assessment, but we're making an effective summative assessment. Now, how can we determine if this summative assessment is effective? It doesn't mean that all of your students passed high proficiently. It doesn't mean that your summative assessment is good or your instructional method is good. Okay, but it could also mean that way. Now, my question is, how are we going to determine? Others would, of course, use a statistical tool if the summative assessment is actually valid or reliable. via determining if it could discriminate it has a discrimination index. Okay, that's one of the parameters. Okay, so that's one. So there are a lot of things that would actually determine if you're an effective teacher, but one of which is that we do not want to make an easy exam just to prove that we are an effective teacher. We do not also want to make a very, very difficult exam just to prove that you are, intellectual in your program or in your subject. As teachers, we want to make or create an effective summative assessment. That's our role as teachers. Now, an effective summative assessment is beyond cognitive, it's also beyond psychomotor, but also affectively. If the learners could carry the learning that you have, remember that in the 21st century education, we are promoting reflective and holistic learners. So, again, I hope this topic rekindles your knowledge on assessments and evaluation. I will not be discussing the scoring methods, the uh, process of creating an assessment tool, because there are a lot of different assessment tools which you have supposedly taken. This is just a reminder on what you should learn or what you should have known prior to taking field study. Okay, so again, please take note on the formative and summative assessments, which plays a vital role on deciding if the learner really learned from your subject. So again, that would be all for the field study, lesson 13, the summative assessments. So should you have any questions, please feel free to message me or comment at the comment section. Thank you very much, and God be with you all. Thank you.